three apologies. I think Richard Griffiths, the Chief Executive, Mrs. Emma Morgan, and the Director of Education, Rhys Hughes. Is there anybody else that has sent apologies? Otherwise, we're all here, are we? Yep. Thank you. Can I, for the agenda first, obviously, is the declaration of interest. So does anybody have any declarations of interest of anything that is on the agenda today? Thank you. I don't think there is any. And then I think we move straight on then to the minutes of the previous meeting. I'll go through these, and are there any? I'll go through them and by the numbers that they are. And I think it's mainly on the the draft annual governance statement. Is there anything on page 2? I'll flick over the pages. Page 3 again covers that. No, nothing at all. And then we go on to item 4, which was the draft statements of accounts. I can't see anybody. Page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. I think that if I can't see anybody's hands up, I can only see 4 hands up, 4 people on the bottom row. So perhaps if anybody has got their hand up, they can perhaps speak out, and I could let them in. I'm sorry. So I take it that we accept the minutes of the previous meeting, and then I think we then move on to item 3, which is the corporate health and safety annual report. I think that this is, it's quite an interesting report, and I think that we welcome Mr. Stephen Nicol, who is the Principal Corporate Health and Safety Advisor. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. As I say, it's the report. I think it's been presented a few times now as sort of an annual report on the corporate health and safety performance, and it is literally just for consideration by the audit committee. I don't want to go through it in depth because obviously you've had the chance to see it. What the main point I would say is the past year's predominantly been dominated by COVID and reaction to COVID and dealing with that, to be honest.
And that has placed much more difficulties on your position with those restrictions on, with in fact meeting and speaking to people and taking these to investigate things.
Yes, it's been very difficult. The increase in work on the corporate health and safety team and the risk and insurance manager has come from because of the review of all the risk assessments with the opening up and locking down. Before anything could be done, we had to go through each risk assessment. So that's been a lot of work this year, is going through that. We have managed to do a few inspections, care homes and schools, some accompanied by environmental health and some accompanied by the health and safety executive. Touch wood, we haven't had any significant issues to deal with as yet. Internally, that is, obviously.
Well done. Can I ask the committee, is there any questions to ask? Stephen? Yes, I've got one. I've got Dilwyn.
I just want to ask about the take-up of training. On page 20 and 21, there are some listings of attendance at training sessions. Now, I was wondering, on the table 12, that I think that totals just over 220 people attending. what's that as a sort of percentage of the total who could have attended but didn't?
I'm sorry, I couldn't give you the exact figure as a percentage of everything of the people that could have. But what we've done over the past year, my interpretation of it is where the refresher training has been required as a necessity, we've done that rather than sort of getting people in en masse, obviously because of the restrictions of COVID. And a lot of the work that HR have done, in fairness to them, is they've moved a lot of training onto the online e-learning type packages. So, as I say, it's only recently that we've actually managed, well, we're having to look at face-to-face training because we're allowed to do it now, but also because of some of the sort of training is expiring, so it's a necessity. You know, an example I could give you is first aid training has to be done every 3 years. So we're trying to manage that basically at the minute.
During 2021, was it possible to have face-to-face training, or did that happen for a few months?
There was maybe about a month where we could have done, but it was a case of it was more online. It is only literally now, or sort of within the past few months, as I say, that we've been looking more closely at the face-to-face training.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
I wonder if another question that perhaps could be asked, and I think what Dilwyn was getting to was the number of people who take the training. Perhaps if we reverted back, is that on much the numbers that we've got here in previous years prior to the COVID? The training numbers would be greater than they are now, because obviously with the COVID that has affected, you know, so many people not being able to be available anyhow.
That's a figure I would have to confirm with the department. Sorry.
Yeah, don't worry. Is there anybody else would like to ask anything else on health and safety?
Chair Dylan Rees, could I ask a question, please?
Yeah, of course you can. I'm sorry, Dylan, I couldn't see that.
Thank you. Obviously, the impact of COVID has meant that people are having to work from home, and we've had, you know, Zoom meetings instead of face-to-face meetings, which means that the staff will have been in front of computer screens far much more than they used to be. And obviously there are concerns of the sort of the long-term damage to health by sitting in front of a computer screen for too long. Is this something that's being considered more closely now in terms of the action plan for health and safety?
Yes, it was sort of almost from the instigation of working from home. It was something that we were looking at. There is an online training package available for staff to look at doing their own DSE assessments to raise awareness of the DSE issues. It enables them to sort of assess whether the workstation at home is suitable and whether they are doing what's need to be. And all staff that work on the computers, it's mandatory for them to do it. So it was something that we were working on, ironically, pre-COVID, but it's something that escalated due to COVID. And it's always been, throughout, from the very start of this, it's been one of the main concerns, obviously, because it's quite a significant risk. I am aware of staff having additional equipment given to them to enable them to work from home, and the need for the staff to do their own individual risk assessments to identify if there's extra equipment that's needed. It's going to be an ongoing piece of work as well, I would imagine.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
I have one. I think I've got one more hand up, and that's John Griffiths. Anybody else aware? I've got
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yn ôl yn 2018, gafodd y Cyngor Sir hysbysiad gan yr HSE ynglŷn â syndrom dirgryniad llaw braich, neu llaw a braich. Wan am ei gymerodd o 2 flynedd i gydymffurfio'r hysbysiad yma i wella gan yr HSE. Allwch chi egluro be oedd yr achos a pam oedd wedi cymryd mor hir i ymateb iddo fo? A be di'r sefyllfa presennol ynglyn â fo? Mae dan eitem 5.
Yes, basically the improvement notice came about. It was a historic riddle. Basically, we have to report certain health conditions to the Health and Safety Executive. That was done in 2018. The HSE executive came in, did an inspection on us, gave us the improvement notice, and you are given, I think it's sort of 6 months to comply with the notice. So we did that. We presented them with the information. The sort of delay period was due to their investigation into it. We basically, they'd asked for information, we provide them information. There was a couple of meetings that we had with them where they actually came down. So obviously, you have to allow time for them to actually come in and make the appointments for them to come in. Once we had the meetings with them and we'd satisfied them with giving them all the information that we could, they then went away to deliberate as to what the actions would be. And it was a case of they felt that we'd complied with the improvement notice. We did have a sort of a closing meeting with the Health and Safety Executive, and when Morgan was present in the meeting, where the two inspectors went through everything. One of the sort of the things that came up in the meeting was that they had actually prosecuted Wrexham for a similar sort of incident, but it was a case of the work that we'd done satisfied them, and it was a case of, obviously, with health and safety, it's one of the things where we have to keep on top of it. The current controls that we have in place match with the requirements of what the Health and Safety Executive have asked us to do. And we have had, since the meeting with the HSE, the closing meeting with the HSE, I think myself, Anwen as the Chief Exec, Housing and my line manager, we've had about 3 or 4 meetings afterwards just to continue the actual monitoring of the situation. But the corporate health and safety team are constantly monitoring it. We have a health and safety officer in housing who's constantly monitoring it. And then we have these sort of periodic meetings with the chief exec to feedback on what the current situation is. So we are keeping an eye on that situation.
Thank you, diolch yn fawr. Without going into detail, personal detail, of course, can you just explain, what the incident was about?
It's hand-arm vibration, it is. It's sort of, if you use power tools, electric drills, things like that, what you can do, due to exposure to vibration over a period of time, you can get sort of damage to the nerve endings. The issue with this sort of thing is that you can improve your occupational health monitoring, which then will identify potential problems. So by improving the work that you're doing, you're possibly identifying historic issues, which then come to light because of the work that you've been doing has now identified it. And that, I would say, was potentially the issue with that individual. And it was a case of, historically, they'd been exposed to high vibration levels. The work that we've done sort of leading up to the notice and since the notice has been to reduce the exposure levels to a really significantly low level. It's more than compliant with the action levels that the HSE recommend.
Diolch yn fawr am yr eglurad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that brings that to an end. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for coming here to give us that information. And now I ask, the recommendation is that this committee considers the report and the recommendations included. Could I have a proposer and a seconder for that, please? Yeah, I've got John Griffiths is going to propose it. Sorry, I can't see anybody else. Oh, yeah, Gwilym. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, Gwilym and John Griffiths. So I now need to go around the committee. Dylan Rees.
Derbyn, accept.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn.
Margaret Roberts.
Derbyn.
Jeff Evans.
Accept.
And Dilwyn.
Accept.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. So with that, then we'll move then on to item 4, which is the annual Treasury management review for 2021, and I think is Mark is going to lead obviously on this.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd. Ia, hwn ydy'r adroddiad arferol sy'n dod ger bron chi yn crynhoi y sefyllfa ar rheoli trysorlus yn ystod y flwyddyn. Mae o'n ofynnol yn ôl y cod i ni ddod ar adroddiad yma i chi fel y Pwyllgor sydd yn gyfrifol am edrych ar rheoli trysorlus. Mae o'n un o 3 adroddiad sy'n dod. Da ni'n rhoi adolygiad canol y blwyddyn i chi, a hefyd mae'r strategaeth yn dod cyn iddo gael ei mabwysiadu gan y cyngor yn y flwyddyn hefyd. Felly, na i redeg yn sydyn trwy'r adroddiad jyst yn pigo allan yr prif bwyntiau. Mae paragraff 2 yn sôn am y pethau allanol sydd wedi effeithio ni. Graddfa llog, wrth gwrs, mae hwnnw'n bwysig yn y broses rheoli trysorlus, ac mae'r graddfa llog wedi disgyn yn ystod y flwyddyn, a mae lawr wan i 0.1% sydd yn effeithio ar faint o arian da ni'n gallu cynnyrchu trwy buddsoddi. Mae o hefyd yn effeithio ar yr cost o fenthyg, ond diolch gymaint o newid ar hwnnw na mae o ar beth da ni'n gallu creu trwy incwm a'r llog ar benthygiadau. Mae yna paragraff 2.2 wedyn sydd yn rhoi dipyn bach fwy o wybodaeth am beth sydd wedi digwydd yn yr economi sy'n cael ei effeithio mwy na lai yn ystod y flwyddyn efo effaith Covid a effaith Brexit. Paragraff 3 wedyn, mae'r tabl cyntaf, paragraff 3 yn dangos yn gwariant cyfalaf ni, a wedyn mae yna dabl pellach sy'n rhoi fwy o fanylion ar y tanwariant. Wrth gwrs, mae'r adroddiad yma wedi bod, neu'r adroddiad monitro cyfalaf wedi bod i'r Pwyllgor Gwaith a wedi cael ei dderbyn gan y Pwyllgor Gwaith mis dwytha. Paragraff 3.2 wedyn yn dangos be ydy yn balansa a arian wrth gefn ni. Mae hwn wrth gwrs yn rhan o'r beth sy'n cael ei archwilio ar hyn o bryd, a mae yna bosibilrwydd i'r ffigur yma newid, ond mae yn dangos bod yn arian wrth gefn a y darpariaethau wedi cynyddu o 31.1 miliwn i 45.2 miliwn. Mae tabl yn paragraff 3.3.1 wedyn yn dangos lefel y capital financing requirement. So, di hwnnw ddim cweit yn faint da ni di fenthyg, mae o'n ffigwr gwahanol i hynna, a be mae o'n dangos ydy faint fwy, neu faint sydd angen benthyg i ariannu yr gwariant cyfalaf yn llawn. So mae o'n ar y funud yn 136.6 miliwn, a da ni'n rhagweld fydd o'n codi 146.1 miliwn ar diwedd y flwyddyn ariannol yma, a wedyn codi i 157.6 miliwn y flwyddyn wedyn. Paragraff 3.2 ar tabl yn fanna yn dangos mae'r cyngor wedi defnyddio balansa a cash yn eistedd yn y cyfrifon banc ni i ariannu gwariant cyfalaf yn lle bod ni wedi benthyg. So fel chi'n weld o fanna, mae'r balans yr benthygiadau yn 124.5 miliwn a'r CFR fel o'n i'n dweud yn 136.6 miliwn. So da ni wedi defnyddio 12.1 miliwn o arian y cyngor yn lle bod o'n eistedd mewn cyfrifon banc a ni'n gorfod benthyg, mae'n resymol i ni ddefnyddio cash yn hynna'n yn gyntaf yn lle bod ni'n mynd allan i 15. Oherwydd mae faint da ni'n gael ar yn buddsoddiadau ni mor isel ac yn lot llai na fysa'n costio mewn llog ar unrhyw benthyciad. Paragraff 3.5. Yn ystod y flwyddyn, da ni wedi talu 3 benthyciad yn ôl. Yr un mwyaf oedd, i atgoffa chi, mis Mawrth 2020, fel oedd yr argyfwng yn dechrau. Nes i benderfynu 10 miliwn am flwyddyn, mwyn sicrhau bod gennym ni ddigon arian i ariannu unrhyw costa oedd y cyngor yn gwynebu. Falch o ddeud, doedd ddim angen a chafon ni ddim problemau ariannol cash flow yn ystod y flwyddyn. Mae hynna rhywfaint lawr i arian ychwanegol a help gafon ni gan Llywodraeth Cymru o ran talu pres yn fuan i ni a hefyd talu trwy'r hardship fund yn costa ychwanegol ni a'r colled incwm. Felly nath y 10 miliwn gael ei addalu yn mis Mawrth 2020. Buddsoddiadau, fel o'n i'n dweud, mae'n llog ni'n isel, neu'r graddfa llog yn isel, a da ni yn dal yn cario balansa arian sylweddol uwch na'r arfer. Da ni yn trio buddsoddi gorau fedra ni yn wahanol lefydd yn unol â'r polisi a strategaeth rheoli trysorlus. A da ni yn defnyddio cynghorau eraill fel lle i ni fuddsoddi'n arian. Mae yna gyfeiriad o fanna i benthyciad i Stockport ac i Salford. Mae hynna wedi cael ei dal yn ôl. Gar hyn o bryd mae gennym ni un benthyciad o 5 miliwn sy'n eistedd efo cyngor Sir Flint. Felly mae paragraff 3.7 ar tabl yn fanna yn rhoi dipyn bach fwy o fanylion ar yr balans a yr benthyciadau sydd ganddo ni, a hefyd dipyn bach mwy ar y buddsoddiadau da ni'n dal ar hyn o bryd. Paragraff 4 wedyn sy'n crynhoi be ydy'n strategaeth ni, sef da ni ddim wedi addalu benthyciadau yn fuan oherwydd mae'n costio gormod ni, mae'r cost o dalu yn fuan yn fwy na fyswn ni arbed yn y llog, so da ni dal yn just gadael i'r benthyciadau dod i ddiwedd i oes yn naturiol. Da ni ddim yn benthyg heb fod angen, da ni ddim yn benthyg jyst i ailfuddsoddi, mae hynna'n groes i'r polisi a da ni ddim yn neud o yn ariannol, fysa fod ddim yn werth i ni neud o, fel dwi'n dweud, fysa y cost o'r llog ar y benthyciad yn sylweddol uwch na fysa ni'n cael yn ôl ar yn arian trwy fuddsoddi. Da ni dal yn parhau i fuddsoddi gyntaf yn ddiogel, so da ni'n ond yn buddsoddi mewn banciau ac yn y blaen sydd efo credit rating sydd yn cyd-fynd efo be da ni wedi gosod allan yn y strategaeth rheoli trysorlus ni. Da ni sicrhau bod gennym ni mynediad weddol sydyn i'r arian, felly bod ni'n clymu fo i fyny am tymhorau rhy hir, fel fedra ni'n cael ato fo a wedyn mae hynna'n creu problem ariannol i ni. A'r trydydd peth ydy trio, fel dwi'n dweud, cynnyrchu incwm trwy llog, ond mae hynna'n anodd iawn gweld bod graddfa llog mor isel a faint da ni'n cael ar benthyciadau. Enghraifft, pres yn gyfrifo'n banc ni, da ni'n cael 0.1% ar hyn o bryd. Sydd ddim hyd yn oed werth i sôn am i ddweud gwir. A fel o'n i'n dweud, oherwydd hynna, da ni yn defnyddio balansa cash y cyngor yn lle bod ni'n benthyg os mae hynna'n bosib. A wedyn mae paragraff 5 wedyn yn sôn am y prudential indicators fel maen nhw'n cael ei alw sy'n rhoi rheoli be fedra ni wneud a gosod cyfyngiadau ar faint da ni benthyg ac yn y blaen. A fedra i nodi bod yn paragraff 6, mae hynna wedi cael ei nodi yn fanna yn perfformiad ni. A mae bob un tu mewn i'r strategaeth, da ni ddim wedi torri ddim un, mae'n benthyciadau ni'n isel yn is na be oedden ni'n ddisgwyl. Mae'n buddsoddiadau ni, mae'r lefel dipyn bach yn uchel, ond maen nhw'n iawn. A mae'r ddau yn tabl 6.1, y ddau yn fanna sy'n dangos be di'r cost blynyddol o benthyg. Mae o'n aros yn weddol gyson, mae'n is na flwyddyn dwytha, fel ydych chi'n gweld, mae ar gyfer yr gronfa'r cyngor 4.8% ac i'r HRA 16.34 sy'n is na y flwyddyn cynt. A wedyn, paragraff 7 yn just crynhoi yn edrych ymlaen. Da ni ddim yn rhagweld llawer o newid mewn graddfa llog, so bydd yn strategaeth ni ddim yn newid. Bydd ni dal yn adalu pe mae'r benthyciadau yn dod i diwedd i oes ac angen i adalu. Na ni'n ddefnyddio cash y cyngor o flaen benthyg os mae hynna'n bosib. A na ni sicrhau bod ni'n trio buddsoddi yn unol ar strategaeth, ond fel dwi'n dweud, chawn ni ddim llawer o log arno fo yn ystod y flwyddyn. A jyst i nodi, does a ddim benthygiad PWLB sydd yn dod i diwedd i oes yn ystod y flwyddyn ariannol yma. Felly, i grynhoi, dim llawer o newid, strategaeth i cario ymlaen, a dwi'n rhagweld ni'n newid yn strategaeth yn y tymor canol o leia. Tan mae graddu llog yn dechrau codi, does am llawer fydra ni'n neud i newid yn strategaeth ni, ond wrth gwrs fydda ni'n cymryd cyngor gyn yn ymgynghorwyr allanol ni sydd yn helpu ni penderfynu lle a sut da ni'n buddsoddi a pa bryd i benthyg a da ni'n cymryd i cyngor nhw ar bob achos cyn i ni wneud penderfyniad. Felly ar hynna, dyna fo crynodeb o'r adroddiad ac hapus i gymeryd unrhyw gwestiwn gen unrhyw aelod. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Mark. There's no hands up. Oh, just a minute, sorry. John Griffiths first, and then I've got Gwilym, I think. Yep. Sorry, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Diolch yn fawr. Just un o ddau o gwestiynau byr bach, really. O dan 3.1, yn cyfeirio fyna at port twristiaeth Caergybi, wel, port twristiaeth, dwi'n cymryd yn Caergybi, mae ddo, am chydig dros miliwn, ac hefyd mae yna rhywbeth tebyg efo adfywio Caergybi am 800,000 a hanner. O, dwi wedi bod yn clywed amdan hein ers tro, lle, be di'r sefyllfa ynglyn â nhw, pam dyn nhw ddim yn symud ymlaen?
Prosiectau Ewrop oedd hein, Grant Ewrop sy'n talu amdanyn nhw, o'na lot o mynd a dod o gwmpas yr un Tourism Gateway i gytuno efo weffo yr rhan o Llywodraeth Cymru sy'n gyfrifol am arian Ewrop di weffo, a i actually gytuno be oedd yn y cynllun a be oedd ddim, a bw oedd yn ariannu be. Wedyn oedd na oedi yn heina yn y cychwyn. A wedyn, wrth gwrs, na Covid slofi bo peth yn ystod 2021 chafon ni'n llawer o wariant yn y 3-4 mis cynta o'r flwyddyn. Felly mae o wedi ariafu y gwariant, ond mae'r ddau gynllun, mae weffo yn cadarnhau bod y grant dal ganddo ni, da ni'n colli dim arian, jyst bod ni, wrth gwrs, dipyn bach yn hwyrach yn cwblhau y ddau brosiect yna. Ond dydy'r cyngor ddim yn colli arian oherwydd hynna.
Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr, Mark. Can I ask one more question, please? Mae yna gryn buddsoddiad mewn ambell i gyngor sir arall. Ydy'r trefniant wertho, ydyn ni'n gorfod talu ffi gweinyddu, ac ydyn ni'n rhaid credit check ar y siroedd eraill. Ydyn ni'n rhaid credit rating check, sorry.
Fel arfer, mae yna broker yn y canol rhwng ni a'r cyngor arall sy'n benthyg o'r wrtho ni. Ond y cyngor sy'n benthyg sy'n talu'r ffi y broker, dim ni. Mewn sefyllfa fel Flint, gyda ni gysylltiad a cydweithio dda efo cynghorau yn Cymru ac yn enwedig yn y Gogledd. So, oedd y trefniad cynta efo Flint di mynd trwy'r broker, ond pe nathon ni rwlio'r buddsoddiad ymlaen, nathon ni ddim defnyddio'r broker yr aildro, so dyna ddim costa. O ran credit checks, wel, mae cynghorau yn cael ei weld fel risg isel iawn yn arferol, ond derbyn mae'r sefyllfa wedi newid ychydig bach. Da ni yn edrych ar eu cyfrifon nhw a fedrwch chi'n cael di cyngor efo credit rating fel banc. So haid I ni wneud y gwaith ymchwil yna cyn buddsoddi. Da ni'n ymwybodol trwy y wasg ac yn y blaen pa cynghora sydd mewn trafferthion. So, Northampton oedd yr un amlwg, ond mae yna ambell un arall o gwmpas hefyd. Da ni yn ymwybodol o hynna. A mae yn ymgynghorwyr ni yn gadael ni wybod pa rei maen nhw'n meddwl sydd yn ddim yn dderbyniol I ni fenthyg, ond todd Flint ddim ar y restr yna, mae Flint yn hollol saff yn ymbar ni, so da ni'n hapus I bod y buddsoddiad yna'n eistedd efo Flint ar hyn o bryd.
Gwych, diolch yn fawr bag.
Gwelym?
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Yn yr adroddiad, ac yn benodol o dan 3.2, da chi wedi rhoi rhestr o gronfeydd wrth gefn I ni fan'na. A rwan, un sydd yn neidio allan, dwi'n meddwl, ydy cronfeydd ysgolion. Da ni'n gweld mewn blwyddyn, da ni wedi gweld cynnydd o 4 miliwn. A rwan, yn y gorffennol, dwi'n gwybod mae ysgolion wedi cael ei berniadu gan wahanol unigolion, gan gwahanol gyrff, wedi cael ei berniadu am gadw gormod o bres wrth gefn. A rwan, gyda'r cronfeydd wrth gefn wedi chwyddo'n aruthrol mewn rhai ysgolion, neu wedi ysgolion uwchradd. Beth fydda'ch cyngor chi I beneithiaid ac I lywodraethwyr? Trio cadw peth o'r arian yma ar gyfer rhyw ddwrnod glawog, yn ceisio canfod prosiectau penodol neu cynlluniau priodol o fewn yr ysgol I gwario fo.
Iawn, da chi'n hollol gywir oedd y cyngor yn cael ei farnu bod balansa ysgolion yn uchel, ac oedd dwi'n meddwl yr un adeg Ynys Môn oedd yr ucha yn Gymru. Dros y 2 flynedd dwytha mae balansa ysgolion wedi disgyn yn sylweddol fel mae toriadau wedi dod I mewn a mae ysgolion wedi bod yn defnyddio eu balansa I gydbwyso I gyllidebau bob blwyddyn. Mae'n siŵr 3 prif reswm pam mae'r balansa wedi codi yn sylweddol yn ystod y blwyddyn yma. A jyst I nodi, tydi sefyllfa Ynys Môn ddim yn wahanol I unrhyw gyngor arall. Da ni gyd yn adrodd mwy neu lai yr un peth. Cynnydd sylweddol mewn balansa ysgolion. Dwi'n meddwl mae cyngor Gwynedd yn adrodd bod I balansa nhw wedi codi o 2 miliwn I 10 miliwn os dwi'n cofio'n iawn. 3 prif reswm, fel ni'n dweud. Yn gyntaf, oedd Llywodraeth Cymru ar diwedd y flwyddyn ariannol yn dosbarthu grantiau ychwanegol I sgolion. Yn gwybod mae ysgolion yn medru dal y balansa. Todd Llywodraeth Cymru yn trio ffeindio ffordd o wneud siŵr bod nhw'n dosbarthu arian mewn I lefydd lle oedd nhw'n medru cael ei gadw, ac oedd sgolion yn wrth gwrs yn un ohonyn nhw. Grantiau ydyn nhw I gael ei ddefnyddio fel I ddal I helpu'r ysgolion, roed fwy o adnodd I mewn I helpu'r blant dal I fyny sydd wedi diodda wrth yr ysgolion fod o'r gau yn y flwyddyn dwytha. So mae'n swm sylweddol yn cael ei wario o'r balansa yna yn ystod y flwyddyn beth bynnag. Ail reswm wedyn, wrth gwrs, wrth I ysgolion fod ar gau, mae'r cyngor yn mis Mawrth 2020 yn datganoli gyllidebau I ysgolion, ac unwaith maen nhw'n neud o, mae'r arian yn eistedd efo corff gwahanol i'r cyngor. Wan, fysa ni wedi medru edrych ar hyn a di dweud, wel, ddylia ni trio a dennill yr cyllidebau o'r model gafodd yr ysgolion yn ôl o'r ysgolion, ond to'na ddim llawer o bwrpas na reswm I wneud hynna. So, wrth i'r ysgolion fod ar gau, wrth gwrs, maen nhw'n gwario llai enwedig ar pethau fatha athrawon llanw, ynni, papur, ffotocopiwyr, y fath o bethau maen nhw'n defnyddio o ddydd I ddydd wrth i'r ysgol fod ar agor. Felly, o'na arbediad mwy na lai I bob ysgol oherwydd bod nhw wedi cael cyllideb ar gyfer rhedeg yr ysgol am flwyddyn llawn, ond oedd yr ysgol ddim yn gorad am flwyddyn llawn. Wedyn efo'r ysgolion uwchradd, wrth gwrs, mae yna swm sylweddol yn ei gyllideb nhw ar gyfer arholiadau blynyddol, y taliad maen nhw'n talu I cybac, ond tydi swm sydd wedi cael ei dalu cybac ddim yn agos i be ydy 100% o'r gost os fysa arholiadau wedi cymeryd lle. Felly mae yna arbediad i'r ysgolion uwchradd y fanna hefyd. I atab eich cwestiwn ola chi, wrth gwrs, yr cyngor dwi bob tro yn trio roed i'r ysgolion ydy mae'r arian wrth gefn yn gallu cael ei ddefnyddio ar gyfer prosiectau penodol sydd o fydd i'r ysgol, ond hefyd fydd rhaid i'r ysgolion gofio mae o'n handi iawn i gael arian wrth gefn i atab problemau ariannol os di niferoedd plant yn disgyn. Yn enwedig os di niferoedd plant yn disgyn am flwyddyn neu ddwy, lle mae'r gwariau neu'r gyllideb yn mynd lawr a wedyn mynd yn ôl i fyny. Wel, i pontio'r bwlch yna, yn lle bod nhw'n gwneud toriadau mewn staffio, a wedyn ail gyflogi staff fel mae'r niferoedd yn codi a mae'r gyllideb ar gael, fydra nhw ddefnyddio'r arian wrth gefna i pontio'r bwlch na, ia? So, mae o bob tro ddefnyddiol yn nhw gadw elfen o arian wrth gefn. Wrth gwrs, fel mae pres yn mynd yn dynach a gyllidebau mynd yn llai, wrth gwrs mae'r ysgolion wedi bod yn defnyddio'r gyllideb i balansio i gyllideb yn y flwyddyn. Ond fel arfer, da ni'n trio gweld beth i cynllunio nhw a cynghori nhw, wel, os dyn nhw angen neud toriadau, oherwydd mae'r sefyllfa tymor hir yn dangos fydd yr gyllideb yn mynd yn llai, wel, well iddyn nhw'n neud y toriadau yn y cychwyn na disgwyl, cos mae'r unig beth mae'n neud ydy gwanio sefyllfa ariannol yr ysgol unigol yna dydy wrth just roed y diwrnod pe da chi eisiau neud toriad i ffwrdd am flwyddyn ddwy, wel, arian wrth gefn, unwaith mae'r arian wedi cael ei wario, mae wedi cael ei wario dydy. So hynna di'r fath o gyngor da ni roi i'r ysgolion.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I got Dilwyn, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, just really a question about forecasts of inflation and bank rate. I note that at the moment, the link estimate of bank rate going through to 2024, it's going to stay at 0.1%. Now, already this year, we're seeing huge inflationary pressures, which I don't think have yet been reflected in the index. So currently, inflation, CPI is running at 2.5%. RPI is running at 3.9%. And I don't understand how current levels of inflation, which are likely to increase, aren't reflected in an increasing bank rate, because the two can't survive when there's a big disparity. The second little point I'd like to just raise is that on table 3.1, where you say there was no borrowing for HRA capital expenditure, I've got stuck on the maths because 13 was spent actually on HRA capital, and the funding was by grants and resources coming to 12. Is it just a rounding error, or is it a mistake? And the other thing I'd like, I know interest rates are very low at the moment, and there could well be an argument that one could start borrowing now for what I would call the rainy day, when you will need more capital, if you can manage to accelerate your capital expenditure. But the way in which capital expenditure has gone in the past is that estimates have been undershot by very large margins. In fact, this year it was almost 50% lower than planned, half. You wanted 39, you spent 20. And there could well be an argument that while interest rates are very low, one could consider borrowing on a fixed interest longer term loan before interest rates start rising. Thank you.
Right, I'll start with the easy one. The second question, I think it's just a rounding error between, it's probably 12 point something, and when you round the two, round ones down, it's probably just a rounding error, I think. So that's simple to answer. On the first question, inflation versus bank rate, I think the Bank of England's assessment is that inflation, although it's spiked at the moment, will go back down because what's driving it at the moment probably is an element of pent-up demand, and inflation, of course, compares this year's costs with what they were last year. So if you take something like petrol, petrol has risen significantly in the last few months compared to the middle of April, May, June of last year, when nobody was travelling anywhere and nobody was buying petrol, was it? So once that evens out, and you're comparing 2021 and 2022 to 2021, that should reduce interest rates and inflation rates. I think that's the Bank of England's assessment, that they'll live with this in the short term, on the assumption that inflation will drop. Also, you've got some element of pent-up demand now, haven't you? People will spend because they haven't had the opportunities to spend. But once that has fizzled out, what will happen to demand for things like holidays and those sorts of things, and that will have an impact on inflation. So I think the longer term view that the Bank of England are taking is that inflation will come back down to under 2, and there's no need to have a short term increase in inflation in interest rates to cover off that. The purpose of course of raising bank rates is if people are spending, driving inflation through consumer spending. Well, because interest rates are so low and it's not worth them holding money in as savings, well, people will go out and spend. So you put up interest rates to make people think twice and put their money in the bank for a rainy day rather than spend. So if inflation, I think, carries on, well, I think the Bank of England might review that 0.1%, but they don't want to squash consumer spending either, because that's keeping the economy going to some extent, isn't it? Everything that comes from consumer spending, VAT and more money circulating in the economy and everything keeps the economy going while it gets back on its feet after the pandemic, I think. So that's that one. On the last one, on capital spend, as you know, capital spend is always an issue for us, that we set a budget and then we rarely achieve it for various issues. COVID made matters considerably worse during 2021 because we didn't spend anything for 4 months because we couldn't get on a site to do anything. Should we borrow now and accelerate our capital programme? Yes, would be the answer if we had the capacity and the schemes to deliver everything. But if you rush into schemes now, they may not be the best schemes. That they may not meet the priorities of the council. And if you saddle the council with debt, even though it's got low interest rates attached to it, it restricts future borrowing when you might have a different set of schemes that you want to spend on and meet your priority. It's like having money in your pocket and you go out and spend it and then you go, oh, I haven't got any money left now. Oh, I wish I'd have kept some and saved it and spent it on this. So it's always a matter of getting priorities, isn't it? What actually is good spend for the council rather than just any spend, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? I don't know. Would Robin like to contribute, or is quite happy with that?
No, it's a very technical report, as you know, Mr. Chairman, and I think that Mark is the best person to present that. So I'm happy to leave it at that for today. Thank you.
Tremendous. Thank you very much indeed. So with that, then I think that we draw that item to a close. I need now. I think the recommendations are that the committee has recommended that the outturned figures in this report will remain provisional until the audit of 2020-21 statement of accounts is completed and signed off. Any resulting significant adjustments to the figures included in this report will be reported as appropriate. 2, note the provisional 2020-21 Prudential and Treasury indicators in this report. And 3, consider the annual Treasury Management Report for 2020-21 and pass it on to the next meeting of the Executive with any comments. I need a proposer now for those recommendations. I'm going to take the first. I think, nobody, anybody, can anybody support the proposal? Yeah, thank you, John. And a seconder, and I've got Jeff. Thank you very much indeed. So I've got John Griffiths and Jeff. So I'll go around the committee now to seek their approval. Dylan Rees.
Derbyn, accept.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn.
Margaret.
Derbyn.
Gwilym.
Yes, derbyn.
And of course Dilwyn.
Accept. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Mark. We then move on to item 5. Quite an interesting one is the annual counter fraud, bribery and corruption report 2020-2021. I think it's over Marion to deliver this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that they won't have seen a report of this type before. It's the first time that I have brought this report to you, and it's the first of a programme of counter fraud work that we'll be starting this year. We were hoping to start last year, but with the COVID emergency, we weren't able to work on our counter fraud strategy. So normally you would get a strategy first and then an annual report to report on the delivery of the strategy. So this is our first step on our journey to our counter fraud work. It starts by just reminding those around the table what fraud actually is, and it's an all-encompassing definition. So those of us, and I know there are a few around the table who have much more intimate knowledge of criminal law than I do, but this new Fraud Act in 2006 has been brought out to bring an actual definition of fraud, whereas before it used to fall under a number of areas, including the Theft Act 1968. We use a very simple definition. It involves stealing, and it's by some means of deception or misrepresentation. So you can see there on that diagram on page 4 what we actually consider fraud to be. So that's where it considers the bribery and corruption side of it as well. I move on to talk about why countering fraud is important. There's been a really big move recently by the government, the Welsh government in particular, to look at what the Welsh public sector is doing in terms of its counter fraud work. It commissioned the Wales Audit Office, as it was Audit Wales now, to do some work on the countering fraud in the public sector, and a couple of reports were written by the Auditor General for Wales on that. And you'll see that on the next page, that in the current contexts, what the Wales-wide arrangements of counter fraud are. And you can see that it varies widely across the public sector. The NHS Wales invests very heavily in national local counter fraud activity. The Welsh Government itself prioritises investigation rather than prevention. And then across local government in Wales, following the transfer of the counter fraud officers to the DWP back in 2014, the dedicated counter fraud personnel have transferred over to the DWP. So I think there's only one council in Wales now that has actually continue to have a counter-fraud team. I think that's Swansea County Council. So there's no overarching group of professional network that supports us in our counter-fraud work. So what we've done in North Wales, we've got together, North and Mid Wales, sorry, there's 7 authorities in North and Mid Wales, is we've got together and we've brought together the professionals to have a counter-fraud subgroup. And we've had 2 meetings now, and we're currently establishing the baseline. So where we all are at, what the Auditor General considers what position we should be at, and we're developing an action plan to all move together as one big 7 authorities to move together to improve our counter-fraud work. So the CIPFA counter-fraud and corruption tracker reports annually, and on page 7 there it talks about what it considers to be the frauds in local government and the emerging areas of fraud. It reports that the largest growing fraud area in the UK is housing tenancy fraud, with an estimated 60 million lost in 2019-20 compared to 47 million in 2018-19. We've spoken to the head of housing services to discuss what kind of counter fraud work is done in this area. He doesn't consider that it is a high risk. It's a fairly low risk in Anglesey, but he has issued an awareness raising article in a recent newsletter, and his services housing management officers have been on some tenancy fraud training. The other area, the next largest growing area of fraud in the UK, is single person discount, where a person gets 25% off their council tax for if they live on their own. And this has an estimated 9.6 million, an increase of 9.6 million to an estimated value of 29 million for cases in 2018. We use an external company to review our single person discount claims and to detect any errors or fraud that have occurred. There is an exercise currently underway. I've only been able to give you the figures from August 2018 because the outcome of the latest exercise isn't available yet, but the last exercise in August 2018 identified £340,000 worth of errors with an error rate of 4.3%. They did consider this to be slightly high, but that's because it hadn't been done for a while. So hopefully, because it's been done quite soon after this in 2020, then 2021, early 2021, then this figure hopefully shall have come down. The other area that is perceived by CIPFA to be a high risk area is procurement fraud. And this is somewhere where the council has acknowledged that it's not particularly strong on where officers authorise, manage and monitor contracts with the private sector. So we'll be conducting a piece of work during 21-22 to review the vulnerability of the council to procurement fraud. Moving on across the page, there is a CIPFA code managing the risk of fraud, and it has 5 areas where it considers the council should benchmark itself against, and these are discussed in each of the areas here. The first being acknowledging responsibility. The senior leadership team have done this. They've acknowledged their responsibility, and they do have on the corporate risk register YM46 risk of fraud against the council, and we have a number of mitigating controls in place and an action plan to consider that and track our progress with addressing that risk. The second principle is around fraud risk identification, and although we have a mature risk management process, and the risk and insurance manager discusses fraud risk with the services when she visits to consider their service risk registers, we haven't specifically got a fraud risk register. So this is something I'll be working on during 21-22 with services to bring us all together as a counter fraud working group to consider specifically counter fraud risks. The third principle advocates counter fraud and corruption strategy as an important area. Although we've got a policy, a number of policies around this area, we don't have one overarching strategy to pull this all together. So that will be one of my priorities this year, and I'll be bringing that to you at your December 2021 meeting. The next principle advocates resources. This principle deals with the capacity of the council to deal. As I mentioned, we don't have our own counter fraud professionals or a dedicated resource for counter fraud, but what we do have is a new post within the team that has an element of their work to do with the National Fraud Initiative, where we'll be looking at the matches undertaken during the National Fraud Initiative exercise to identify or potential areas of fraud. So we'll be reporting to you on that on a regular basis. The final principle is take action, and this is where it wants, where we discover fraud, SIPFA endorses that we should be investigating fraud and publicising fraud and raising awareness of staff. So in the two tables there, you've got two of the policies that are related to fraud and the acknowledgement of staff that they have understood and read those policies. Up-to-date figures will be given to you in September when the monitoring officer brings her report to you with an updated figure. You can see there on page 11 that we've undertaken a number of fraud raising events during the year. Where staff have done some virtual training, some face-to-face but on a virtual basis, and some with the NatWest Bank, our bankers, to give us fraud awareness and scamming awareness training. We also plan to do an e-learning for staff so they can access that at a time it's convenient to them. The Chief Exec has also issued a general email to staff in April 2020 to remind them of their obligations around cybercrime. We regularly share National Anti-Fraud Network alerts with the relevant staff, and all fraud occurrences are reported to the Governance and Audit Committee and to the senior leadership team. So you'll be aware of two fraud occurrences that happened last year. I reported these I reported these to you last year. They were mandate frauds or malicious redirection frauds. I won't go over them again because we did talk in some detail about them when they occurred. Suffice to say that although the victim of one, we got the majority of the money back, and in the second one, it was averted completely due to the fraud risk awareness training that we'd had the previous week. So very timely training. Also during the year, the grants team has detected and stopped a number of attempted fraudulent COVID-19 grant fraud applications before payment. We don't currently have a system for services to report fraud to internal audit. It is written in the financial procedure rules that services should report them to us. So hopefully with the counter fraud working group set up, it will reinforce this message that all frauds should be reported to internal audit. So it makes sure we are able to report them to you. So in conclusion, some level of public sector fraud is likely. It is going to happen, even in normal times, but 2021 was an unusual year with unprecedented challenges. And the first malicious redirection fraud was wholly, I think, the subject or the fraudster taking advantage of the fact that it was the first week of lockdown and everybody had been sent home and the country was a little chaotic, to say the least. We we have done some counter-fraud work during 2021, in particular when one of our members of staff was redeployed to the business grants team, and they worked closely with Mark to ensure that we stopped any fraudulent payments for the applications for the COVID-19 business grants frauds. And so the challenges and opportunities for us going forwards, I think every single council in Wales is struggling with capacity for counter-fraud professionals, and the Welsh Government, and in particular the Auditor General for Wales, is very keen that we do work together and collaborate to improve our counter-fraud work. So that's what we've been doing with this counter-fraud subgroup in North and Mid Wales. We have acknowledged that we need to do more to raise awareness of counter-fraud. So we'll be doing the e-learning package and refreshing the policies. But there's also a clear need for a tough stance by elected members, chief exec, and those charged with governance to make sure that we have these robust arrangements in place to make sure that if we do are alerted to any fraud, we do investigate and we do prosecute anybody that we found to be guilty of fraud. Sorry, not that they're guilty of fraud, but to prosecute them and take them to court. But it is the behaviours and actual actions of all members of staff that will generate a culture that is a counter-fraud culture that will make sure that fraud is minimised in the organisation. So we're just setting out on the journey. This is our first steps into working on counter-fraud initiatives. But hopefully, as I say, in December 2021, I'll be bringing the strategy to you. And this time next year, I'll be reporting how well we've done with our initiatives this year. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think one of the most interesting things was the formation of the subcommittee of 7 other authorities working together, because a lot of these frauds will have similarities. And I'm sure that that will be a tremendous benefit. I'm looking now for Art. I think I've got one hand. I've got Jeff Evans, Councillor Jeff Evans.
Yes, thank you for letting me in. I want to refer to page 50, current and emerging fraud risks, in relation to the largest growing fraud area in the UK. It relates to housing tenancy, with an estimated £60.1 million loss. I want to refer to that because historically I have been involved in issues as to what I believe is a serious fraud, where the local authority issues monies to tenants to pay landlords with no intent whatsoever to pay it. The result being that thousands of pounds are taken away from the authority and thousands of pounds are not then issued to the landlord, resulting in ongoing issues. They eventually lose their property, they come back to the authority, they then are looking for a new household, etc., etc. And I brought this up to the council some time ago, and I asked them if they knew that a fraud was occurring. And by a fraud occurring is exactly what I just said, that they received claiming money, receiving it, not paying it. Would the council continue to pay that tenant ongoing, even in another tenancy? And the answer I had was yes, because legislation demands that. It's a major fraud. I know of so many people, and I get so many complaints from landlords that because they are not paid the rent direct, and it goes to the tenant, it is only the tenant who gains, and both the authority and the landlord who suffers major fraud and loss. I don't know what can be done with that, because it is a national problem. It is a legislative demand that you pay the tenant direct. But it's costing us millions. It's causing us problems with housing. It's causing us problems for landlords. It's causing us problems all over the place. And if this says 60.1 million is lost, I tend to think there'll be double that figure. But what can be done? And is this the right place to bring it up?
I see Mark has got his hand up. Did you want to go before Marion answered that, or is that?
I think it would be probably more appropriate for me to respond to that one as the officer that's responsible for payment of housing benefits.
Thank you.
Housing benefits, of course, is a claim from the tenant, and the council processes the claim and issues money to the tenant in respect of their claim. It is not for the council to decide or to ensure that the tenant then uses that money to clear any contractual obligations they have with their landlord. The legislation is clear. It is the tenant's right to have the payment of their benefits paid to them. It is a benefit, not the council paying rent on their behalf. We pay benefits to the claimant, and the claimant is then responsible for passing it on. If the claim is fraudulent, i.e. the tenant has no entitlement or the claimant has no entitlement to benefit, as Marion explained, we are no longer responsible for the investigation of benefit fraud. We simply pass our evidence on to the DWP, who have their own fraud team who investigate benefit fraud. So we no longer do benefit fraud as a duty on us. So in response to Councillor Evans's questions, one, we can't do a lot because we are obliged to pay the tenant or the claimant their claim if it is a genuine claim. If the claim is fraudulent, well, it's not our responsibility or duty to investigate that any fraudulent activity by the claimant.
Whilst I do understand that, Mark, and I'm not relating to a fraudulent claim in that they're not making a genuine claim, I'm saying it's fraudulent in that they have no intention of passing those monies claimed onto the rightful person to whom it's intended. And the fact is, at the end of the day, it is the council who loses that money, and it is the landlord who loses the money, and it is the fraudulent claimant. And you see it on TV shows all the time, millions of pounds, which is being not paid to the rightful person as intended. And originally, councils and were paying landlords direct. So this is a new phenomenon, but it is one which is causing a lot of people a lot of distress. Maybe you're right, and I accept you can't do much about it, but it is a fraud which is going on, which is costing a lot of people a tremendous amount of hardship and difficulty.
Just to clarify one point, we make payments to the claimant. It is their entitlement to the benefit. Yeah. We are not paying something they're not entitled to. We are paying them their entitlement from their claim. Whether they pay that over to the landlord is another issue, and is a contractual issue between the tenant and the landlord, and it's not the duty of the council to ensure that benefit payments are then used for the purposes intended. That's unfortunately the way it stands.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that response. I've got one more hand up. I think it's Dilwyn.
I just want to ask Marion why, when listing on page 7 or page 50, the current and emerging fraud risks, that cyber fraud is not mentioned there. I know it's mentioned later on in the report, but it surely is of impact on the on local authorities as much as it does on individuals.
That's an interesting point, actually. It is is it fraud in terms of yes, it's a threat. These are actually it's the SIP for counter fraud and corruption tracker that these figures have all come from. It is a risk, but would they consider cyber as a fraud risk in particular? It's only when, I suppose, a ransomware attack or a DOS attack is undertaken where they they attempt to get monies from us. But even then, if you go back to the definition of what fraud is under the Fraud Act, I'm not sure whether the cyber would be fraud in that way, in the way that this report's talking about fraud.
I think that's quite a fine point.
Yeah. But no, it wasn't the counter fraud. The counter fraud and corruption tracker doesn't mention it in terms of cyber. Cyber is more tends to be spoken about as cyber crime rather than fraud. So it is no, it's not a crime in its own right, but I suppose it's the ransomware. Would that be considered fraud? I don't know. Maybe the ex-police officers on the call could tell you what the difference in that definition is. I did, before we move on, Chair, I did want to just clarify one thing though in those figures. In that third sentence where the third paragraph where it does talk about 60 million lost in tenancy fraud, it's not tenancy fraud in terms of the financial terms of the housing rent, the housing benefit paid for the rent. It's in terms of subletting and those types of fraud. Where there's a huge problem in London and the more populated areas where people are subletting their council houses and council flats. So they get a tenancy which they don't really need. They move in with a friend and then sublet their council house or council flat and get the money. That's what that 60 million is. It's not to do with the housing benefit.
Thank you very much. You can relax, John, because I think Dylan has rushed in to ask this question. Dylan. I'm sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. No, when John and I were sort of in the police service, cybercrime was not an issue, so we certainly aren't experts in that area, I don't think. I've also got a question in relation to the current and emerging fraud risks in relation to page 7 of the report. And we do see in the local media from time to time publicity of enforcement cases to deter people in relation to council tax fraud and also housing fraud. But I don't recall seeing publicity in relation to enforcement cases of disabled parking concession fraud, blue badge schemes. Now, is it because we're not detecting them? Is it because it's not happening? Or is it because we're not publicising that here on Anglesey?
Again, I don't think it's a particular problem for Anglesey. The blue badge fraud that they're speaking about in this context is where in London, because they have the parking is such a problem and it costs a lot of money. People are fraudulently applying for a blue badge or selling a blue badge so that people can park for free. I think selling of blue badges on Anglesey is I think is virtually non-existent. I really don't think the only thing I suppose you could have a blue badge being issued on Anglesey and then sold, and somebody in London could be using it, I suppose. But it's London boroughs and the inner city areas where there is a lot of car parks, council-owned car parks, that are missing out on income because of blue badge fraud. Yeah. The National Fraud Initiative has put a value of £575 associated with each blue badge that is fraudulently used or sold. With all the best will in the world, if somebody sold a blue badge on Anglesey and it was used on Anglesey, we are not going to be losing £575 worth of car parking income. So I really don't think it's an issue on Anglesey.
Yeah.
I've got one more hand up, but I'm not sure that's been left there by Mark. It's probably been.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I thought I'd taken it down, but I haven't. Obviously.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I think that comes. I don't think I've got any other hands up at all. I don't think.
Chair, you've got Councillor John Griffiths.
Oh, so I'm very sorry. I wouldn't want to miss John. John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mae'n anodd credu yn y marn i bod 7.3 biliwn o bunnoedd yn cael ei golli o fewn Llywodraeth leol, a bod dros biliwn yn cael ei golli yng Nghymru. Faint o ganran y biliwn hynny sydd wedi cael ei colli ar Ynys Môn?
Mae hwnna'n anodd iawn i atebu. Os da chi'n siarad hefo Mark, dim lot o gwbl dwi'n meddwl. Dydy o ddim yn meddwl bod twyll yn risg uchel o gwbl. Dwi'n meddwl bod llefydd fel Caerdydd a yn y de sydd yn mae'r mwyafrif o'r twyll yn digwydd. Dwi'n meddwl, oedd Mark yn deud wrth i fi, pan o'n i'n dechrau hefo'r cyngor, mae pawb yn nabod i gilydd. Does dim twyll yn mynd o'i flaen ar yr ynys, ond os mae o yn mynd ar ei flaen, da ni'n gwybod amdano fo. Ond.
Diolch. Oedd gennau nifer fawr o cwestiynau i ofyn, ond chwarae teg i chi, Marion, da chi wedi ateb rhan fwyaf yn nhw. Un peth o'n i'n sylwi yn yr adroddiad, a dwi'n synnu braidd, a hynny ydy nad oes system i wasanaethau roi wybod am dwyll posibl sydd wedi nodi a'i hatal. Ond be dwi eisiau egluro i chi cyn arolygydd yr heddlu ydy'r ffaith, cofiwch bod unrhyw ymgais, unrhyw attempt yn erbyn i ddwyn neu i dwyllo yn drosedd yn erbyn cyfraith o wlad. Ac wrth gwrs yn y marn ni, bydd coeryswydd am y fath erlyniad yn sicr o atal y fath achosion yn sylweddol well na jyst ei ymwybyddu. Felly, dwi'n cefnogi y bwriad i gryfhau y strategaeth atal twyll. Dwi yn teimlo bod ddylsa bod chi'n hefyd yn ystyried penodi swydd arbennig ar gyfer atal twyll. Ac wrth gwrs, dim jyst i atal twyll, ond hefyd i casglu'r holl dystiolaeth ar gyfer erlyniad i'r llys. Dwi'n yn credu efo'r soft touch yma. Dwi'n credu os oes na rhywun yn trio o unrhyw ffordd i dwyn arian neu twyllo fo arian o'r cyngor, dylsa bod nhw'n cael ei erlyn a dylsa bod ni'n cael y coeryswydd i'w atal o'n y dyfodol. Diolch, Maria.
Diolch.
Could I just add to Marian's comments, please, Mr. Chairman?
Of course you can.
Yeah, just i egluro dipyn bach mwy ar beth ddudodd Marian yn fan'na. Dwi'n isio chi fynd o fama meddwl bod fi ddim yn meddwl bod twyll ddim yn bosib yn cyngor Ynys Môn. Wrth gwrs, mae unrhyw berson sydd efo'r mynadd, y modd, y sgiliau yn gallu o leia trio twyllo, mae o'n i fyny i rheolaeth mewnol y cyngor i stopio bobl twyllo'r cyngor, ond mae o yn bosib, a dwi ddim yn deud tydi o ddim yn bosib a tydi o ddim yn digwydd yn cyngor Ynys Môn. Be dwi'n meddwl ydy'n casgliad i o 30 mlynedd o brofiad o weithio yn y maes a gweithio yn archwilio mewnol. So dwi'n mynd yn ôl pen eisiau i gychwyn yn archwilio mewnol, faint o arian parod oedd yn cael ei hel, faint o enghreifftiau nes i darganfod a adrodd ar o enghraifft clarcod cinio yn sgolion yn dwyn pres. Mae'r risg yna wedi mynd, cos da ni wedi mynd yn cashless, da ni ddim yn derbyn cash mewn sgolion. So mae risgiau fel yna wedi lleihau yn sylweddol. Twyll byddal, wrth gwrs nes i ddweud, da ni ddim yn gyfrifol am wneud yr ymchwiliad i mwy, ond mae faint o waith neu faint o ddata sy'n cael ei checio yn erbyn gwybodaeth sydd gan y cyngor, mae DWP yn dal HMRC ac yn y blaen. Lot mwy wan, da ni'n defnyddio lot mwy o cyfrifiaduron i wneud gwaith checio nag oedden ni 20 mlynedd yn ôl. So mae'r posibilrwydd o rywun ddim yn neud ei job a methu rhywbeth trwy damwain, dim bod nhw'n bwrpasol yn trio methu. Mae'r faint o'r checks yna wedi lleihau, cos mae'r cyfrifiadur yn neud lot o hynna rwan. Ar y pwynt, ia, da ni'n nabod yn gilydd, ia, weithiau mae fod yn fychan yn help, cos os does na rhywbeth allan o'r arferol yn mynd trwad, mae yna bosibilrwydd da wneith rhywun mynd, be di hwnna, dwi'n mynd all, be di hwnna. Ond mewn cyngor mawr lle mae'r niferoedd o biliau a bob peth sy'n mynd trwy'r systema ariannol lot mwy, mae yna llai o obaith i unigolyn mynd, hang on, be ydy hwnna? Enghraifft da, ydy'r grantiau busnes, nathon ni dalu 40 miliwn dros y flwyddyn dwytha. Ond os ni'n dweud bod rhywun wedi sbio ar bob un, a dwi'n reit ffyddiog bod ni wedi cael 99% ohonyn nhw'n gywir. Dwi'n ymwybodol o un achos lle da ni'n meddwl bod y twyll wedi gymeryd lle. Ond heblaw am hynna, dwi'n reit ffyddiog bod ni wedi talu y person iawn swm cywir am be oedden nhw'n heiddi cael. Ond o hynna oherwydd sut oedden ni wedi wneud o a bobl bod ni'n prosesu nhw yn y ffordd nathon ni. So, ia, dwi'n hollol cytuno efo crynodeb Marian o'r sgwrs gafon ni. Dwi'n mynd dweud bod na ddim twyll, ond be dwi'n dweud ydy mewn cyngor bychan yn y ffordd da ni'n gweithredu, mae risg yn gymaint llai. A wrth gwrs, mae'r bobl ma sy'n gwneud hyn fel bywoliaeth, os da chi'n licio dweud o fel fatha proffesiwn, maen nhw'n teuddu targedu cynghora lot mwy na cyngor Ynys Môn, oherwydd mae'r be geith nhw ennill yn ôl yn lot mwy wrth targedu cynghora mawr yn Llundain, Gaerdydd, Birmingham, Glasgow. Rhaid chi gofio, mae gwariant cyngor Birmingham yn fwy na gwariant y 22 gyngor yn Gymru gyd efo'i gilydd. So, mae targedu mae return wrth fod yn llwyddo i targedu un cyngor mawr yn lot mwy na trio targedu cyngor bach yn Gymru. So, dyna fo lle dwi'n dŵad o, ond fel dwi'n dweud bod os o ddim twyll a dos o ddim posibilrwydd o dwyll yn digwydd yn Ynys Môn. Mae o'n bosib, a bosib bod o wedi digwydd, ond dim ar sgêl mawr. Os does na rhywbeth wedi mynd drwad, fydd nhw'n fychan iawn fysa ni'n casglu. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Diolch eto, Mark.
I've got another hand. I think I've got Robin. Have I? Robin's hand, is it?
Yeah, diolch, Mr. Cadeirydd. Mond un sylw gyda fi fel rhywun sydd hefo profiad o dros 30 mlynedd yn gweithio yn y byd ariannol. Yn amlwg mae twyll yn rhywbeth sydd wedi cael ei ddrymio mewn i ni dros blynyddoedd lawar, a dwi'n meddwl na dyna di'r negas yn fama. Peth pwysig ydy bod ni'n codi ymwybyddiaeth staff yn y cyngor o'r matha o dwyll y medra nhw dod ar eu traws nhw yn ystod i gwaith. A bod nhw hefyd yn gwybod lle i fynd fel bod nhw'n medru adrodd unrhyw amheuaeth sydd gynnyn nhw am unrhyw fath o dwyll sy'n dod o'i blaenau nhw. Fatha mae Mark yn dweud, mae'r byd wedi newid, mae'r matha o dwyll yn sicr wedi newid heddiw i be oedden nhw pan ddechreuais i weithio tu ôl i y cownter yn NatWest ym Mhorthlaethwy yr holl blynyddoedd yna. Ac fel adeg hynny, mae yna dwyll yn digwydd oherwydd bod yna gymaint o arian parod yn symud yn ôl amlaen. Mae pethau wedi mynd yn fwy soffistigedig yn sicr o ran y matha o dwyll, ond dwi'n meddwl yr peth pwysig ydy bod ni'n codi ac yn cadw yr ymwybyddiaeth ymysg yn staff ni, fel bod nhw'n medru adnabod yr achosion mae pan maen nhw'n dod o'i blaenau nhw. Yn ystod yng ngyrfa fi, beth bynnag unwaith y flwyddyn, oedden ni'n gorfod wneud hyfforddiant penodol ar dwyll a gelfennau eraill. A dwi'n meddwl bod hynny'n rhywbeth dyliau ni bod yn annog yn staff ni i wneud, a bod nhw'n ymwybodol o'r peryglon sydd yna o herwydd twyll. Ac ella nad ydy'r sgêl ddim yn fawr, ond mae'n siŵr o fod yn digwydd yn Sir Fôn, rhywbeth yma'n digwydd yn llefydd eraill. Ella fydd o ddim gymaint, ond yn sicr mae'n bownd o fod yn mynd yn ei flaen. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much. I've got Dilwyn. I want to say.
I just want to ask, Chairman, whether we should ask our external auditors to get a little bit more involved in fraud detection. I think at the moment they'll report fraud if they come across it. They never look for it intentionally. And I fear that we may be in the situation that things are going on that we have no knowledge of, and therefore can be complacent. I know this is like shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted, but at least we'd get a better measure of how much fraud is occurring in the council if external audit would pay a bit more attention to it. Thank you.
Is Marion going to? Do you have any views on that, Marion?
External audit, Alan Hughes is here on the call. I think he probably wants to answer rather than me.
Yeah, terrific.
Hi, thanks. Just to respond to Dylan's question, we can always look at the scope of our work when planning the work with the corporate management team at the start of the year. We can share examples of fraud that we have come across during the year and so on. But ultimately, detecting fraud is something that the internal controls of the council should be primarily be doing for you. So it's about getting assurances that those internal controls are in place, that training is up to date, that there is good fraud awareness in the council. I would suggest that those are the primary controls that you need to hone first of all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're very lucky to have you there, sitting in the back, listening to that question, to take it. I think that brings us to an end of item 5, and the recommendation is that the committee considers and comments on the activity carried out during 2020-21 to minimise the risk of fraud, bribery and corruption occurring within and against the council. Can I have a proposer of that, please? Yeah, thank you. Gwilym is proposing, and I need a seconder.
Second, Chair, Dylan Rees.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I'll go around the committee. John Griffiths.
Derbyn, accept.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn.
Margaret Roberts.
Derbyn.
Jeff Evans.
Accept.
And Dilwyn Evans.
Accept.
That brings the conclusion of item 5, and now we move on to item 6. And I think again the author is Marion. Is Marion leading on this?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Well done. Thank you very much.
So this is your usual update report on the work that we've done in just a little under 3 months since we last reported to you back in April. You'll see that first table under paragraph 3 is the work we've completed. The first 4 audits, you've had the reports for those, and you had them at last times. I think it was the June audit committee. You would have had them. We didn't discuss them in any detail. I don't, but you needed them for to support the annual report, so you've had them already. Then the final 3 is were included in your pack, so the full report and the action plan for the final one, which is the management of school and official funds. I don't really want to talk about these in any detail because, as you can see from that table, in those 3 reports, we've only actually raised 1 risk issue. So very pleased with the work that's been gone there. Of particular mention is the work that was undertaken by the Education Department. The staff there have been really engaged in the audit we did last year. And when we followed up, I think there's only 1 moderate risk outstanding. All the others have been implemented. And this is a piece of work we did, and we helped the Education Department with the unofficial funds in schools. So this is the funds that schools hold where they've raised cash, raised funds for the extracurricular activities that they undertake and things that the school budget doesn't actually cover. So I think we've now, you'll see from your report that all the audit certificates have now been produced. There's just 1 where our external audit person is working on, but so you have assurance that every single school in Anglesey, bar that one that's in progress, has an audit certificate for this school fund. So a really fabulous piece of work, and I really would like to congratulate the Education Department staff, Aaron Evans and his team, for really grasping hold of this and making sure that everything was addressed in the action plan. You'll see from the table below that there are 3 pieces of work in progress. They're just coming up to draft report stage now, so they'll be with you next time. There are a number of overdue actions, but these are also being followed up at the moment as well. So I'm hoping that by the next meeting in September, we'll have concluded our work there, and I'll be able to give you some good news on their successful implementation. And we've also been involved in 3 investigations, 2 of which are still ongoing and 1 has recently been concluded. And then at Appendix 1, you can see the dashboard there, very brief dashboard of the items that are outstanding. As I said, there's 2 major and 6 moderate, and they're to do with the levers process report we did last year and the supplier maintenance report we did in January 2021.
Thank you very much. I think it was particularly good, the praise that you were giving to the education of the management of the school and official funds. That was, they made as you quite rightly said, they made amazing progress. Do we have any questions? I'm looking for hands. No, I think that if, well done.
Sorry, Councillor John Griffith.
Oh, sorry, I've got Dilwyn as well. Just a minute. We've got a terrific rush. John Griffiths.
I'm sorry, I don't want to sound pedantic in any way, but it's something that's puzzled me every time I see this dashboard. You've got 1 column called overdue actions. And you've got another column called outstanding actions. What's the difference between the 2?
So overdue, I'm glad you've asked that question. I can explain what it is. The overdue actions are actions that have missed their target due date. So there are 8 actions there that the management said they would have done by a certain date, and that would have been now. The total outstanding actions is every single action that is outstanding, but the target date hasn't been reached yet. So they're still working on it, and they've said, for example, they'll have it implemented by December next year and the like. So we're not too body then. That's the total entirety of what's outstanding. So I think what is it, 41? So there's 60, and of those 60, there's 8 that are overdue.
Not bad. Well done.
Yeah.
Now it's over to Dilwyn.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask Marion about the significant figure of 35 in the outstanding issues on resources. It sticks out like a sore thumb. What's happening with resources at the moment?
Well, I think it's skewed slightly because we have done a lot of audits in resources. As a result of the fraud that we had, we did do 2 audits in creditors. One was the supplier maintenance and one was the identification of duplicate payments and the recovery of those. They're still all, these aren't overdue. So there's 7 of those are overdue, but the others are, work in progress and haven't come to their due date yet. But yes, to be fair to resources, the majority of our work has recently been in resources, and so it does look as if it's skewed slightly.
Thank you.
I don't think there's anybody else that wants to. No, I think that concludes that. Can we? I think the recommendation to get this that the Governance and Audit Committee notes the internal audit assurance provision and priorities going forward. I need a proposer. I need a seconder. No. Oh, just a minute. I've got John. John Griffiths is proposing.
Second.
And Alan is seconding. So I'll go around the table now. Dylan Rees.
Derbyn, accept.
Margaret Roberts.
Derbyn.
Gwilym.
Derbyn.
Jeff.
Accept.
And Dilwyn.
Accept.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we now move on, and I should have welcomed Mr. Ellen Hughes before. I now see him in the team now. I hadn't actually seen you before. Welcome, and I think you're going to deal with the next thing, which is the Audit Wales, the works programme and timetable for Anglesey County Council. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Diolch, Mr. Cadeirydd. I ddechrau fo, beth swn i'n licio wneud ydy cyflwyno chi I adroddiad neu grynodeb sydd gynnon ni mewn ffurf o'r newydd sydd yn dweud beth di sefyllfa'r gwaith sgyn archwilio Cymru ar waith yn Cyngor Ynys Môn ar hyn o bryd. Ac hefyd mae o'n rhoi crynodeb o waith y rheolwyddwyr eraill ac yn rhoi crynodeb o y gwaith cenedlaethol mae'r Archwilio Cymru'n ymgymryd â adroddiadau ac hefyd yr adroddiadau da ni wedi gyhoeddi hyd yn hyn. So beth dwi'n gobeithio fydd o fel fydda ni'n dod yn gyfarwydd hefo'r adroddiad yma ydy fel fydd o ryw one-stop shop os bynnwch chi o'r gwaith sgynnon ni ar y gwaith yn lleol, y gwaith da ni wedi gwblhau ac hefyd y darlun cenedlaethol a blas hefyd o'r gwaith y rheolwyddwyr eraill. Da ni'n bwriadu creu hwn yn chwarterol. Ac gallwch chi feddwl, sa ni'n gallu wneud o fel bod o'n disgyn hefo Pwyllgor Archwilio'r cynghorau ar draws Cymru, ond o ystyried bydda angen creu'r adroddiad ar gyfer 22 o Pwyllgor Archwilio sydd yn cyfarfod ar gwahanol adega, bydda fo'n ryw ongoing fees di fod yn diweddaru o drwy'r amser. So'r bwriad sgynnon ni'n symud ymlaen ac yn ei weld sydd mewn gweithio di greu o'n chwarterol a roed o ar gyfarfod nesaf Pwyllgor Archwilio. Yn sydyn iawn drwy'r crynodeb, be welwch chi'n gyntaf yna gwaith archwilio ariannol meddrwg yn ni. Mae'r gwaith o'r chwilio'r cyfrifon ar y gweill yn dydi, ac hefyd rydyn ni'n arddystio hawliadau cymorthaf bydal tai. Mae gwaith leni a llynydd yn hynny o beth. Drosodd I waith archwilio perfformiad, mae gynnon ni 3 adroddiad lleol y fama. Un rhan barthol ar draws Gogledd Cymru a 2 sy'n benodol I Ynys Môn. A mae'r 2 adroddiad yna tua'r un lle I bob pwrpas, maen nhw gyd mewn wahanol radda fod yn drafft. Un fwy neu lai 'di chytuno, un arall lle mae'r gwaith gwiro cywirdeb ar y gweill, ac un mond 'di rhannu am sylwadau bora yma. So swn i'n gobeithio fydd y dair adroddiad yna, sef Comisiynu Lleoliadau Cartrefi, Gofal Pobl Hŷn, Cynnal a Drwyedd Ariannol a cynllunio'r gweithlu hefo chi ar agenda Pwyllgor Llywodraethu ac Archwilio'n fuan iawn lly. Wedyn, mae'r tabl nesaf wedyn yn deud y gwaith sgynnon ni'w gynnal yn y flwyddyn i ddwad hefo amserlen. Da ni'n symud ymlaen drwy'r adroddiad. Mae'n rhoi blas i chi o'r adroddiadau cenedlaethol sgynnon ni ar y gweill a wedi orffan lly. Cyffwrdd ar waith yr arolygwyr eraill. Ac yn y cefn mae yna restr o'r adroddiadau sy'n eisoes wedi cyhoeddi gynnon ni, y rhai cenedlaethol. Gobeithio fydd y crynodeb o fydd i chi, a na i drio ngorau ato unrhyw gwestiynau.
Thank you very much. Does anybody? I don't think there are. I think it's a pretty straightforward report what you've done, and I'd like to thank you. So I think that we're going to. I haven't missed it. No, it's a case now of accepting this now, and I need. I've got a proposer. I've got Dilwyn is proposing, and Jeff is seconding. Thank you very much. Can I go around the table then? John Griffiths.
Derbyn, accept.
Dylan Rees.
Derbyn, accept.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn, accept.
Margaret Roberts.
Derbyn.
Gwilym Jones.
Derbyn.
And that's it. So we accept that report. Yeah. So thank you very much indeed for to use. Thank you very much. I think we move on now to the final item. I think that is correct. Is the final item is the update on the work forward programme, and I think that there are some minor amendments that put onto the approved programme for 2021-22. Are there any? When you look at that report, I don't know whether does Marion want to say anything?
Yes, Chair, just members will recall that you approved your forward work programme for 2021-22 at the last meeting, or the May meeting. There have been a couple of minor amendments where either workload issues or things to do with the legislation have changed, or there's an additional one. So members, you'll see the 8th of February, there's an additional report coming to you there, and that's the annual report of the Partnerships and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee. The Local Code of Governance has moved as well. That should have been coming to this meeting, but they decided that it would be better going to the December meeting. September was too full with all the annual assurance reports that you've got going there. So we've pushed that back to the December meeting. The fraud strategy has been pushed back to the December meeting so that the counter fraud working group can do some work on it first. And finally, on the last line, the panel performance draft self-assessment won't now be coming to you this year. It'll be coming to you next year. And that's it, Chair. They're the only amendments from the report that you had back in May that the committee approved.
Thank you very much. I think Dilwyn is going to ask a question. I've got his hand up. Dilwyn.
I'd like to see the item fraud strategy be changed to counter fraud.
Yep, no problem. I can do that.
I think that's what's intended, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes. It's not committing fraud, it's countering fraud. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much.
I don't think there's anything. I think it's just a case of now accepting the forward work program. Don't know. So again, I need the recommendation is that we've accepted the Governance and Audit Committee notes the minor amendments to the approved forward work program for 2021 to 2022. And I've got Gwilym to propose it, and I want a seconder. I've got and Jeff Evans. So I need to just to go around quickly again to get the approval of all the committee. Start with John Griffiths.
Ie, gyda diolch I Marian a pob un oedd yn cyfrannu. Derbyn, accept.
Well done. Dylan.
Derbyn, accept.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn.
Margaret Roberts.
Ategu diolchiadau John a derbyn.
And Dilwyn.
Accept. Thank you.
So I think that brings the meeting to an end. I just thank you all for your attendance and particularly for your contributions, particularly for all the officers who have taken part, and special thanks again, I think, to Anne Holmes, our hardworking committee clerk. Thank you very much indeed. So we've now called the meeting to an end. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, hwyl fawr.